And we're rolling. Welcome to Inner Athlete Training Podcast. Today we have a wonderful guest. We have the unprecedented, the amazing, the inspiring, the enigmatic, the inspirational,
and really good looking,
the handsome, highly energetic, and the words go on and on, Martin Rooney. How are you, Martin?
My pleasure to be here, James. You know, every time we get together, we come up with something great, but thanks for setting the bar so low.
Yeah, exactly. Once it starts low, it's all uphill from there. But hey, man, what I wanted to do was talk to you specifically, keep this on track about coaching. You have a brand new book out called Coach to Coach. And as of this recording, I've read it, which I know is a privilege not everybody has had yet. Totally loved it. And we talked about it in great detail. But even before we get more into the book, I want to talk about coaching in general. All right. So let's just take it back. Maybe when you and I were growing up in the 70s and the 80s, it always seemed like the word coach had this stigma to it. It was always the punchline to a joke. Yeah. You know, Coach, the old man on Cheers, was always the guy they made fun of, right? It was oftentimes the middle-aged science teacher who performed very well in football or track or whatever their respective sport was, and then they wind up being the coach. But just because they had that athletic background didn't always mean that they had the ability to communicate as to why they were even good, right? So they didn't always have the ability to teach it. So for a long time, it was stigmatized, but I've seen that change in the past 15 to 20 years. And you, more than anybody I've ever met, hold such a reverence for that term. Like, that term is meaningful to you. And that's grown on me as I've known you through the years. It's like, wow, this is like really serious, you know? And that's what I want to talk about. I want to get into that kind of depth. And I also understand too, like when I said they were the butt of the joke, it was always from the outside, right? Like kids have always had a good relationship with coaches, right? But when you were sort of the adult on the outside and looking at it, the coaches just weren't really inspiring, right? But now it seems these days they are much more integrated in understanding psychology and understanding motivation and that kind of thing. And I know your brand and your presence in this space had something to do with that. You know, to what degree is hard to quantify, of course, but I know your presence had a lot to do with that. So let's just talk about that from the beginning. Let's take it way back. Why did coaching call you? Just explain that to us.
No, and I think everything that you just said right there, James, was really powerful. And for everybody listening, what I made a discovery is having had the opportunity to have worked with NFL teams and Olympic medalists and some of the highest level military organizations and universities, as well as high schools and young kids too. What I really realized was, at first, it was a word I want to use for everybody as you're listening right now, is identity. And I was trying to understand my own identity, and my identity, I thought I was the UFC fighting guy, or my identity, I thought I was an athlete, or there was a period of time I thought my identity was the speed guy or the football guy. And then as I got older and I really understood that I wanted to be more significant, when I really started to take a look at how I was able to have done what I did, I realized I was always coaching someone. So regardless of any of those identities I thought I had, I was always a coach to someone else. And that's when I did the deep dive into, wait a minute, but like you said, as you were referring to, man, coaches, maybe they don't always get the respect, or I started to really discover there really was never much education beyond, well, you played the sport, so now you're coaching the sport, or we got a position to fill here and we need you, and now you're the coach. And as I started to dive deeper, what I really discovered, and what I'm hoping we're going to talk about today, is I believe it's the most important job in the world. I believe it's the title that has one of it's the most revered that we don't really understand it. And what I mean by that is, when a doctor tells you something, when a priest or the Pope tells you something, I think people listen. There's an automatic programming of, hey, there's authority that comes with that. But the word coach, it almost supersedes them all. When somebody's your coach, it's kind of like you don't not listen to the coach. You don't not take what the coach says as the truth or what you're really supposed to do. And that's when I really started to identify that, well, if this lack of education takes place and then these people have this position and God forbid they do it wrong, well, then there can be incredible negative implications. And what I started to realize was that every time I saw something bad happening, not just in the athletic space, but it could be in the world, I would always say, well, who was this person's coach? Or did anybody coach this person? Right. And that's when, holy cow, I would just start waking up and I said, I have to be on a mission here to get people to understand how important it is. And then I, for the last 15 years, dove very, very deep into trying to really create clarity for myself of what it means and what it is and how to be a great coach to someone else. And that's what I've been speaking around the world about. And now this new book, which I couldn't be more excited about, I think should be the, it's not the be all end all, but it's a parable story-based book, which by the way, coaches got to tell good stories. And it is, for lack of a better term, like we talked about, the Hippocratic oath of, as that is to medicine, this is to coaching.
It's always an interesting assumption when we talked about just because the coaches were able to do it didn't mean they were able to coach it, right? So and you see that even in academia. Like just because your chemistry teacher was really good at chemistry doesn't mean they had the skills to teach it. Yeah.
So coaching is separate from that. See, unfortunately, sometimes it'd be like, oh, you're an athlete, so you're also a coach. No. An athlete and a coach are two very, very different things. A trainer, just because you can get yourself in shape doesn't mean that you can coach it. And so I agree 100%, but that's what I want people to get excited about, because people don't make that distinction. And then all of a sudden, that's where we can make big mistakes, and mistakes that can affect people, like we'll talk about today. I call them ripples, that coaches are creating ripples. And by the way, if you're listening to this, you are a coach. If you're a parent, if you're a coworker, if you're on a team, if you are on a sport, whatever it is, you're a coach to someone else.
So let's talk about that in more detail, because that's where I was going to go next with this. Was you just described the macro. You have the team, you have the coach, everybody has their respective place. We honor the coach. But talk about it more on the micro scale. How does the parent become the coach? How does a friend become a coach to somebody? Talk about all the nuances that happen in our day-to-day lives that we would never categorize as, oh, I'm coaching this person. And coaching is an interesting term because it's blowing up all over the place now. You have life coaches all over the place. And I think that had something to do with it too. But yeah, pull us out of the athletic arena, pull us out of the quote coaching arena, and tell us about how coaching works in the micro.
Yeah, well, how I describe it is, simply put, a coach is there to close the gap in between something someone wants and where they currently are. And it's interesting that no matter who I meet, and if you're listening to this right now, I can tell you this one thing about you for sure. You are listening in some way because there's something that you want that you don't have, and there's somewhere that you are right now. And whether it's you want to be more fit, or you want more information, or you want to be more influential, and you saw that this was about coaching, whatever it is, you are also hoping to close that gap. And see, it means because you can't do it yourself. So you need help. You need coaching. And that's where the coach comes in. But you see, unfortunately, that if a coach doesn't understand that that is the job, then you can do things very incorrectly. So, as a parent, you can yell at your kid because they did something wrong, or you can nurture them and teach them how to do it right. You could tell your kid they will never be anything because you were never anything. And you know what? Because of that coaching authority that you have, they'll believe you. And that might be exactly what happens, which is when I go deeper down the roads of expectation and how you set that with coaches and standards. There's so much that we won't be able to cover today, but the goal of this is to get everybody to understand, holy cow, I am a coach to someone in some way, whether it's my spouse, brother, sister, coworkers, somebody. I have influence. And if I understand the power of that, then I better make sure that if I spend my time always helping someone get closer to where they want to go, then I'll make you this promise too. Your life's going to be pretty good, and you're not going to meet with as many problems, because most of the people that I meet, unfortunately, they like to get together and gossip, or they like to get together and waste time, or they like to get together and, I don't know, talk about negative things. And that doesn't get you any closer to anywhere you want to go. And it's definitely not coaching in the direction you need to go.
So what would you say the attributes, or for another word, perhaps elements of a good coach are? If we were to look at the anatomy of a coach, what qualities, values, I'm sure there are probably thousands, but what would you say would probably be the top 5, top 10 most important ones to master.
Well, it's interesting you say that. And that was a question that came up so much. That led to so many of the different talks that I give around the world. And these are to not only sports teams and universities, but to Fortune 500 companies. And as you mentioned, people are recognizing now that coaches are important, and this word does mean something. And so I have distilled out, and I would say this, I guess you could say there are thousands, but those thousands could continue to be distilled down where, oh, well, it's covered by this word, it's covered by this word. And really, if anybody reads the new book, Coach to Coach, the first one that I hammer home that's big, and I want everybody to hear this one, if I were to say that there was any attribute, or whether you call it a skill or an ability, that you would need more than any other as a coach, the word is enthusiasm. And what do I mean by that? Say it was a sport and you're a sport coach. If you're listening, you got to be fired up about that sport. And if you're ever going to fire up someone else. So one of the lines that I use in the book is I say that, you know, if you want to make anyone on fire for something, first you have to be burning. And so the first one that I'll throw out there that I think is critical is it's just having a sense of enthusiasm. And it kind of acts like the flame that the moths will fly to, and you become attractive, and then you gain more of that influence because of your enthusiasm. And hey, I'll say this, some of the most dastardly world leaders in history that we all know who they are, man, sometimes if you take a look, their secrets were enthusiasm too. So like enthusiasm, you can coach people in good things or bad things, but when you got tons of enthusiasm for something, people get on board. Now, I'm talking about positive influence here and positive enthusiasm, but that is one that I always laugh because it's free. Anyone can have it. It's your choice to have it. And now I want to take it one more leap. Instead of sport, however, I want to tell you about what I consider probably the most important part from the book. And it's how you direct the enthusiasm. And unfortunately, most people, if I were to ask them what are they enthusiastic about, they're either going to tell me a thing or they're going to tell me a thing about themselves. But if you want to be a great coach, the ultimate lesson that you have to learn about enthusiasm is you have to learn to be very excited about someone else, the person under your charge. And that is, it's interesting. I'll say this, if you guys can look up my history, I was a track and field Division I athlete. I was on the U.S. bobsled team. I'm a black belt in judo. And through all those experiences, I wasn't excited about anybody else. You know, an athlete has to be very selfish. I was enthusiastic about me. I was worried about what I was doing. I was very selfish. But I needed coaches then that were also excited about me and wanted to help me make those dreams happen, get me closer to that thing that I wanted. And now as I look back, I had some that were, and I mostly had a bunch that weren't, that held me back as a result. And here's what's interesting. Now I am a high school coach. Now I coach people every day. My company is in charge of coaching thousands and thousands of people every day. And now I know I've made the transition from athlete to coach because I'm no longer more concerned and enthusiastic about me. I'm more worried about everybody else. And so again, and I'm just trying to give everybody the depth here that James asked for, hey, a bunch of words, but the one I'm going to start with is enthusiasm. And we could talk about that the whole day because it doesn't just mean rah-rah. So I want everybody to understand enthusiasm doesn't mean bring everybody into a big huddle and start going nuts. Enthusiasm is where do you direct it and who it is it's about.
So if we were to break down the word enthusiasm, like what would be some of the component parts? Like you unpeel that word and like, so what are some of the subtext to enthusiasm? And it was an interesting point you brought out about the dictatorial leaders, right? Because you can go to Hitler, you can go to Stalin, you can go to Lenin. And if you study them objectively, amazing lessons to be learned in their ability to persuade a crowd.
Well, and you know, if you look at the history behind that, and obviously we're not going to focus here a lot, but what I have understood through history was these people, they contracted and hired people out to teach them about enthusiasm and to teach them how to orate and really, you know, pound that podium and just get so fired up. So, but again, it goes back to that word, what we're trying to share too, of influence. And that's one of the big words that I also talk about with coaching greatness, as you know, is influence, where to be a person of influence, you got to have enthusiasm. So you cannot walk in and just be, you know, just so mundane or just so monotone and think you're going to make a change in someone else. So to lay down, we've already identified that a coach is very influential. Well, how does he do that? The first step is through his enthusiasm. And where should that enthusiasm be directed? It shouldn't be toward himself. It should be to the people that he works with or she works with. And if you're doing that, which it sounds so elementary, I'll tell you what, harder than it seems. So I'm challenging everybody right now, because if you're nodding your head like, oh yeah, I get that. Oh, so I get it. A coach is influential. I should be enthusiastic, and in particular enthusiastic about what the people I'm trying to help do. But I don't meet a lot of people like that. So yeah, it sounds really good, just like 8 hours of sleep and not eating fast food. But I don't meet a lot of people that actually practice what they preach. And that's my challenge to anyone listening right now, because the world will be a better place if we had better coaches.
You have quite a diverse background, Division I athlete and bobsledding team, and worked with a lot of amazing UFC fighters throughout your time. You have a lot of street cred, but you're saying you don't necessarily need street cred to be a coach. Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely not. And here's the thing. I will say this. It doesn't hurt, because I don't want everybody to get the wrong idea. Hey, if you were a star football player and then you become very passionate and then spend as much time learning how to be a great coach and then put those together, that's a powerful combination. But hey, there's nothing more famous than the coaches of today, in particular Bill Belichick, who's known as one of the greatest NFL coaches of all time. Yeah, he played football, but he was no star football player. But his father was a legendary scout and coach. And so I think what's pretty interesting is Belichick probably spent more time learning about coaching and working with other people than he did about actual football, but then married those two and has gone on to be one of the most successful, arguably, ever. But I've also met tons of people that they didn't have, whether you want to call it street cred, or you didn't have to be a world-class athlete or a super person, but you have to be super at understanding people. And you have to be super at being ceaseless in your pursuit to learn things. And so I definitely believe that you've got to understand yourself as a coach. And then if there is something that you want to coach, then you do have to understand what that thing is, because you got to be able to deliver the knowledge about it. But you could learn that. So for instance, I don't know how to play the piano, but I know if I now invested the next bunch of years in learning how to play it and then coupled it with my ability to coach right now, I bet I could coach someone to play piano, but I would have to learn both. But I don't have to be a concert pianist and get paid at Carnegie Hall before I can coach somebody to be great. So anybody listening, you're a coach, and you should not be making an excuse that you can't get out there and make a bigger impact because you didn't play in the NFL or Major League Baseball.
So in addition to enthusiasm, what constitutes a good coach, right? So somebody can maybe master enthusiasm, but when you look at the component parts of coaching, are there some people who just may never master it or be good at it, which wouldn't shock me, because that's like any endeavor or any enterprise, we undertake. But like, is there somewhere down that road where you realize, okay, maybe coaching's not for me, because how do you know if you're not getting it done?
Well, what I would say is, obviously sometimes, and this is pretty interesting, when I try to define coaching, and I try to always narrow things down to very small ideas, the job of a coach, if you haven't already kind of gotten it from me today, you know how I said it's to, where somebody wants to go and where they are, and then close that gap. So really the job of a coach is to produce results. It's to produce a result. So for instance, if I'm a fitness coach, my job's to help somebody lose fat or build some muscle, period. Like, that's the job. If I don't do that, that's an easy way to measure that I must not be coaching this person, because it is not happening. If I'm a teacher, the job is, when we do these assessment tests to make sure that the students are getting the information, if they're all bombing, then man, I am not getting it done. I'm not getting the result that I was trying to produce. So whatever it is that you're trying to help have happen, that's the easiest way to make sure if you're coaching it or not. And coaching, I could say, is not for everyone. Not everybody wants to be the person that helps everyone else get somewhere. And that's okay too. Just like not everybody wants to be a teacher or a cop or a fireman or who knows what. But what I will say though is, and this is the thing you hinted at right there, is, but I believe everybody could be a way better coach but a lot of times the information isn't out there. And that, again, maps back to what I am doing and what I am trying to do. I'm trying to define it so people understand what the word means. And then I am trying to deliver this education so they understand the role of the job. And what I've tried to do is make it very simple, that then if you just did the work, you will be able to do it. Just like, hey, when you become a parent, it doesn't come with a manual. Like, they don't send you a kid manual when you leave the hospital. And a lot of people figure it out. And unfortunately, because by figuring it out, some do it wrong and some do it right. And some didn't really want to do it at all when they figure it out. But the ones that invest the time and learn and understand it, there are practices and principles that will be more successful. And that's where I've spent my last couple decades trying to identify that for coaches, so that if I can just create better coaches that impact more people more positively, I know somehow something good is going to happen.
If you were approached by Stanford, Yale, Harvard, they said, here's some money, take some time, build a curriculum for coaching. We want to create a master's program in coaching. We want to create a doctorate degree in coaching. What would that look like, and how would you put that together?
Wow. Well, it's kind of funny that some of that has already happened, without a doubt, where I think I would already have the introductory first year or two with just the dozens of presentations and the thousands of pages that I have written. But what I would also do to add on top of that, and remember, you got to stand on the shoulders of giants, and you also have to, no one does anything alone. Where I'm lucky is I am in certain circles with not only people that I consider great coaches, but also people that are also great researchers of coaching, and spending a particular amount of time in that, where I would think we would have to then, once everybody understood the rudimentary concept of what it means to be a coach and all the pieces, then we could deep dive into each one of those avenues. So yeah.
But what would that look like? So in other words, I'm going for a master's program in coaching, and I look at the syllabus, I look at the curriculum, and I'm trying to decide, like, what would that curriculum look like? Like, what would the classes look like? Maybe this is something you haven't really sussed out in your mind, but just off the cuff, to your best of your ability, like what would that program look like?
Yeah, well, the program would definitely be a combination somewhat of lecture, but I think that wouldn't be enough. I think there would be so much practical application, as well as whether we would want to say projects or interactive. And actually, the funniest part would be everybody would be out in the field, especially because it would be master's programs where we would set up that these people are coaching, somewhere. And I think that's the thing too, that I have learned more from, I wrote this in my bio of the new book. I have learned more coaching years of middle school and high school teams than I ever did from the pros or reading about it, And so definitely that would be a combination of lecture, but then putting that stuff to work in practical application, which you don't always see.
But courses in psychology would weigh in, early human development. Like, talk about some of that. Like, what was factored in?
Absolutely. And without a doubt, that's what I mean is, I guess coaching is really built up of, and I was taking it for granted, James, because, when I got my master's degree, they're already considering that, somehow a lot of this already. Right. But what I would say is, it would be either built off the foundation of psychology, built off the foundation of motor learning, human movement, which is all, but how about this? Then also off of whether we would want to, I don't even know what the exact term would be, but whether it's communication and even oration and speaking, like all of these pieces are critical to being able to get the pieces across. And these could either be tracks in the program, but I would envision those are all things that would be prerequisites that you already have to get into the program. And then once now you've, just like for medical school, you've already had your biology and your chemistry and everything. And then once you get there, now you're learning the specifics of the trade there. So maybe the answer, or hey, what we're looking for everybody is, the thing you should be getting from this is, coaching is built of a wide array of skills. You've got to understand people. You have to understand empathy. You have to understand psychology. You have to understand emotional intelligence and how you appear to someone else. You've got to understand how to speak, write. All of these things would be critical. And then Now, once you've got those, if you will, and you're being thrown out into the field to coach, that's when you would be putting it into the practical applications. That's how I would see what the masters would be, is you've already got all this stuff. Hey, we got a good person. They've got a foundation. Just like when I went to the medical university, I already had anatomy. I'd already had motor learning. I'd already had neuro, but I didn't understand how I was going to use that for physical therapy but then, so when I went to therapy school for the masters, that's where I learned therapy now. And then they put me out in the field and then I had to apply it. So what's interesting is you don't see a lot of that exist for coaching right now, you know, which is cool. But remember too, that coaching, as James said also, and man, I don't want to, you know, maybe today everybody's listening like, oh my gosh, coaching's a whole lot different than I thought, but I'm taking it almost in the realm of sport coaching, you know, because remember, parenting, like we just said, is coaching, but that could be a whole separate master's degree. And life coaching, which sometimes the word gets watered down, where somebody can go to a 2-day course and now they're a coach. That is definitely different too, where that's usually somebody sits on a phone and tells you a bunch of stuff to do, and whether you do it or not. Like, so what I'm talking about is skin to skin.
There's no psychology requirement for that.
No.
Nothing. You can have none of that background and still be a life coach.
You could actually... well, you could, we can all be one right now. But what I would say is I'm trying to take this serious. And actually this might be a good segue to doctor and lawyer. Those are professions. And what James hinted at the beginning of this was like, the coach doesn't get the same respect. And it's because we don't see it as a profession. And I would love to see it as a profession, so that when people also heard the word coach, they had the same reverence for it that doctor has, because I believe people do inherently, and they give it that authority, but we don't take it as seriously. And as a result, then we don't develop the education or spend the time developing ourselves to really execute the job as well as it could be. And again, I'll go back to it. I'm on a mission to make a world of better coaches. Why? Because I really believe, and I want you, the listener right now, think about the most influential people in your life right now. And I guarantee you're not going to say it was my garbage man and it was this guy I sat next to on the subway. You're going to say this was this coach or this person that appeared in my life and gave me these lessons that I needed at a time that I needed them, and I never forgot them, and I still live them. And so what I'm saying is that person was a coach to you, and you just lucked out that they came across. But now imagine everybody had those skills, and they were stronger and they were better and they had an understanding that every time they spoke to somebody, they had influence and it could have great impact. The world would be a better place, guaranteed.
Your book is not a manual, it's a story. So why did you choose to go with the narrative approach to the foundations of coaching versus writing a lengthy tome of a workbook?
Well, as James knows, so this is my 11th book, and it's my 4th book with a major publishing house. And all of the previous books were either textbooks or very educational, like we were talking about, like, oh, as if you're going to school, like here are the exercises, here's the theory behind them, here's the deep theory on metabolic training. And hey, people always loved them. Hey, by the way, those books have sold 250,000 copies, but I wanted to make a greater impact. And what I found was, if I just wrote a really detailed textbook that people would not be able to either get all the way through or take the lessons away quick to build upon, then, man, maybe that wasn't the direction that I wanted to go. And I started to look into the genre, for lack of a better term, if anybody's familiar with the books, The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard, or any of his books, or Patrick Lencioni and the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, or John Gordon and the Energy Bus, these are all guys that I'm very familiar with and know a few of them. They use really, they use really cool stories to get points across that have huge scientific backgrounds behind them, but they make them accessible and digestible for everyone and really quick. And I've always been attracted to that style. Guys, I'm a voracious reader. James knows. He's seen my library of a couple thousand books. And to be honest, when I speak and present, I'm a storyteller. And I had this idea that I was going to do this as a story, because everybody was always saying when they come to my courses, they would say, man, you got to do a book on this. You got to do a book on this. And it didn't feel right writing it as a textbook or a manual, like if this, do that. Oh, now this, then do that. And I sat down, James knows, I holed up in my office. I shut the phone off. I closed myself off for 8 hours a day for like a month straight. And I wrote, and it just flowed out of me. And on a whim, I sent it into one of the top publishing houses in New York. And within a day, I got a call and they said it's the best one they've read. And now it's coming out, and they fast tracked it. And now it's coming out in a few months. And I could not be more excited. But the reason I wrote it was accessibility. Also, people, if anybody understands about storytelling, that's why I said coaches have to tell great stories. Our brains are designed to remember stories. We remember music. We remember stories. You can remember a song that you haven't heard in 20 years, and you can recite it the minute you hear it. But if I tell you to tell me what your teacher said in
the Krebs cycle.
Yeah, about the Krebs cycle, or in geography class in 9th grade, you won't even know. You won't even maybe remember their name. And so there is a magic to putting something correctly into a story that it imprints and lays down and has impact. And I wanted to go for it. And it was hard. It was a departure. I've never written something like that. James knows, he's read it. It's conversation. It's a conversation in many ways between a very old coach and a very young coach that needs help. And I had never written in that style. I had never, even the punctuation and grammar was a real challenge to figure out how to do it. And, but it was exciting for me. And it was something, again, a labor of love, where on this mission, I knew what I had to be doing. I needed to do something bigger and evergreen. And I think this is it. And man, I hope everybody does check it out. You can get it wherever books are sold. And when you do, I think it's going to have an impact. And I hope to hear from you about it, how it did.
The story is so crucial to one of the greatest quotes I ever heard one time was, what are stories? And the best answer I heard was, a story is humanity's way of telling itself about itself. So it's the method by which we can communicate, our broadest ideas. Even as a philosophy guy, Plato wrote all his work in dialogues. So it wasn't just, I'm going to sit down here and write this manual on philosophy. I'm going to have this conversation take place to two people, and I'm going to get the ideas out that way. So you're in good company. Yeah. Because it's like what you're doing is thousands of years old in tradition. That said, just talk briefly about some of your own life experiences that informed the writing of this book. Other books, other personal experiences, just.
Well, the biggest one that I always talk about, and he doesn't know it yet, he knows the impact that he's had on me. And it was a coach that had found me in 7th grade when, hey, I was at a kind of dark time in my life, chubby little kid. He wasn't doing well in school. And there was this guy, and they had the baseball tryouts. They told all the 7th graders they weren't even eligible at the meeting. And when I was walking out of the room, here's this guy standing there, and he says, "Hey kid, you look perfect for track." And, I want everybody to listen to this very carefully. At that time in my life, I didn't feel perfect at anything. Like, if there was a word that I was the furthest from in my mind, it was perfect at anything. And this created a spark in me. And I said, "Track, what's that? I don't even know what it is, but I want to do it," because the guy had enthusiasm, and
I'm going to be perfect at it. I might as well do it.
Yeah, I might as well try it. And so he, the next day I went out for track, and 7 years later or 6 years later, and I'm graduating tops in my class in high school. I'm getting a scholarship to college. I'm eating right. I'm sleeping perfect. Like the guy changed my whole life. But here's what's interesting. He changed my whole life because he had the courage to stand outside of a doorway and try to sell people on something he knew was so important that he had never met. And that's the thing that always wows me, like that he had that kind of bravery, or whatever you want to say, because I think a coach has to have that to be able to, and he saw greatness in anyone, and so he's still, we're still in touch today, almost 30, 40 years later, or 35 years later. And he just visited me at my home a few months ago and is still coaching me, and it's interesting though, that I got lucky. And that's why I always say it is, I got lucky at the right time that the right guy showed up. Cause I also had a lot of bad coaches along the way too, but this guy made up for all of them. And in a weird way, he doesn't know it, but I dedicate the book to him, and I cannot wait till I have it in my hands to be able to take one and give it to him, which I think is going to be very powerful. But if I were to say,
still around.
Yeah. And, but meaning he, is retired, he no longer coaches. But even now to this day, like, cause now I'm a track coach, he'll call me up and he'll give me pointers and tell me what's going on. So he's a coach. Like, that's what this guy is. And he only wants to help. I think that so many of the lessons that I was able to distill from him, now looking back, those are the things that I teach, because he does the things that you were supposed to do as a coach. And this book in some ways is my honor to honor him with it. But I would say of most influential coaches, that was him. And then other people that were important too. So not to sell them short. Hey, my parents for sure. And my mom was a physical educator. She was a gym teacher and coach, you know, so it's kind of in the blood. My dad was an Olympic caliber rower. And so these guys, hey, they both supported me like crazy too. And I got lucky. But here, yeah, maybe you might say, oh, well, my parents weren't that or this or that or this. Well, listen, get the lesson. The person has to surround themselves with good coaches. So I got lucky for that to happen, but you could go out and be a great coach and now put yourself around somebody and now they get lucky too. Right. So the thing is, you will never find somebody that did it themselves. Right. So if you say, hey, Michael Phelps, how'd you get all those medals? He's not going to say, well, I dove in the pool every day by myself and just swam around and here I am. He's going to say, no, it was my coach, which they always talk about. And it was my mom. And he got lucky to be around the right people. And so what I'm challenging everybody, though, is instead, if it didn't happen for you, stop waiting around and go be a great coach and go be that person for somebody else. And now that's where I'm spending my time and what I'm trying to do.
So tell us again the name of the book and how people can find it, where they can find it.
So the name of the book is Coach to Coach, and it's as simple as, hey, you want to buy a copy or two, and I would definitely recommend, this is a book that if you know anybody that is a coach, if you know anybody that is coaching your children, this is a book for them, easy to read, and a perfect gift. You can get it wherever books are sold, Amazon.com, and all the different Amazon affiliates around the world, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, if you're in Canada, Indigo, or Chapters, and if you're interested and you run an organization and you would like to get multiple copies and get great bulk deals on those, you can go to porchlightbooks.com and they've got some incredible deals for, bigger orders like 50, 100, and like some of the organizations that I work with that have already ordered 500, you get huge price discounts on the book for if you run a big organization or work with a lot of people. But regardless, hey, I hope you get it. And then, hey, that you write me, and you can either find me on Facebook, social media, or either of my websites, trainingforwarriors.com or coachinggreatness.com, and I will get back to you, because I'm going to make it a point to always write everybody, and I want to hear what your coaching story is. So one of the interesting things that I want to start collecting is, just like I just told you that neat story about my coach, I want to hear some great ones too, because I want to eventually do a work where I honor all these coaches you've never heard of, not just the guy that makes $5 million a year to coach the University of Alabama or or some professional football team. I want, like, hey, the ones that I think sometimes make the biggest impacts are the ones we'll never hear of, and I want to hear about them. So if you're listening, you have one of those, send it to me, because I'd love to hear that.
And who would you say, you mentioned the story about when you were younger, but who would you say a current example of, whether they're the high school coach or whether they are the $5 million a year coach in a university, who stands out to you today as, hey, that's a model coach? And even if they're not alive, let's say the last 25 years or so.
Well, without a doubt, I think you can't almost have a coaching conversation without talking about John Wooden. So John Wooden from UCLA, which I'm not going to tell it, but you need to find out more about him, where he didn't even want to be at UCLA. But when ESPN at the turn of the century did their top 100 coaches of all time in history, he was number one. And what's very interesting about John Wooden is, I don't know if this is exactly true, but I would be really strongly believe it, because I've read so many of them. He's got more books written about him than any other coach, and the majority of them are written by former players about him. So, I mean, imagine the power of that. Like, so first challenge I'll give you right now. Hey, have you had 20 or 30 books written about you? And if you haven't, and they aren't written by people that you coached, and actually, and they were written for good reasons, not notorious ones, that you probably have something to learn from them. But the secret of this guy, it was all about his character and his character development. And he really believed about developing character and core values in people. And he felt that everything else would take care of itself. And that's what this guy did. He built it on the bedrock of that. And, you know, it's actually, you could look up Wooden's Pyramid of Success. And, you know, he dedicated his whole life to what he was going to teach these guys through coaching. And it has nothing to do with basketball. Yet they still have the longest all-time winning streak. He won 10 of 12 national titles in his last 12 seasons. Incredible stuff. And so without a doubt, that would be a guy like, I wish somehow my name could be mentioned in the same sentence and, you know, you've made it, you know, kind of thing. And unfortunately, yeah, a couple of years ago he passed away, so he is no longer with us. And maybe another one just to throw out there, opposite end of the coin, Jack LaLanne. You know, James and I have talked about this, that meaning that whole enthusiasm part again, that like, if anybody doesn't know his history, check it out, learn about what this guy did and what he did just with, because he just loved fitness so much and understood the power of it and nutrition, that he was ceaseless in his pursuit of enthusiasm to everyone else, that I think he changed a lot of the world as a result. So that would be another example. So we've got that kind of example of those core values and that bedrock, but then also the, hey, be high energy and be on fire, and you can make a real positive impact too. So both of those people, a lot of books about them and a lot of information out there about them. And unfortunately, both of them, you know, no longer with us, but two influential people definitely in my life too.
And LaLanne was way ahead of his time. He started in the 1950s. Oh, yeah. He was doing fitness on TV when most of the people watching that were like, what yeah, what is this why is this guy like doing push-ups off his chair? Like, what's the point of that? Like, what he was such a trendsetter. It was amazing. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with? It's not a question of mine.
Yeah, well, what I would do is, hey, everybody that just listened to this, and I hope you spent time with it and I hope you enjoyed it. The big piece is I wanted you to get, if anything else, because, hey, we went pretty deep there, is you're a coach. And you got to understand that that's part of your identity too. And whether you have children or you work with someone or there's someone out there counting on you, you could be influential. And if you say the right thing at the right time, you could really help them. And just, if nothing else, that you get that from this, that you have the power to do that for somebody else. So use it wisely and use it. Like that would, I'll challenge you as well.
Take it serious.
Yeah, take it serious and use it, because you never know who you're talking to, and you never know that what you could say, man, the impact that it could possibly have. So that would be the best way you could thank us for this show that we put together for you.